History Inside a Nutshell, the show where we sail into our port of call discussing maritime history. In today's video, we're going to be looking into a story that has recently popped up in the newspapers. Now, this is a story that has been told once before, but it has been forgotten until 2022. But this story is more interesting than you think because a lot of people have claimed that this story is based on two iconic characters from a famous movie. It is a very fascinating and tragic story about love, loss, and a relationship which is surrounded in mystery within history.
The Steward and the Maid, an unknown Titanic story. The story of the RMS Titanic has been told countless times, and the disaster has been shown in television dramas and movies. One of those movies, the third highest grossing movie in the world, is James Cameron's Titanic. Released in cinemas in 1997, Cameron's famous movie centres on a first-class passenger Rose, who is engaged to an American man, and a third-class passenger Jack, who came on board the ship after winning a poker game. The pair fall in love during the Titanic's maiden voyage, before their love relationship was tested during the sinking. When it comes to character inspiration, it's argued about who was the real Jack and Rose, and this is where the survivor stories come in. Some stories are overlooked, while others are well recognised, but another Jack and Rose-inspired story came to light in the British press. In 2022, a Titanic artefact was auctioned at Henry Aldridge & Son Co. The artefact in question was an enamel brooch in the shape of a white star with the word Titanic in the middle. The brooch belonged to a steward who was working aboard the ship. However, this became a love token when he gave it to a first-class maid. Sadly, the steward didn't survive the disaster, but the maid did, along with her employer and her employer's cousin. This is the story of Roberta Maioni. Roberta's story begins in 1926 when she submitted her entry for a writing competition run by the British newspaper The Daily Express. Upon submission, judges must have read it with great interest since her entry was about her survival on the RMS Titanic and her 4-day romance. Entitled My Maiden Voyage, Roberta had written a mind-blowing eyewitness account of the disaster and her life with her mistress, the Countess of Roths, as her maid. Travelling with them were the Countess's parents and cousin Gladys Cherry. The group were planning to travel to Vancouver, Canada. They boarded the ship at Southampton on the 10th of April 1912, travelling as first-class passengers. She stayed in cabin B79 on the starboard side. In her story, Roberta describes what she remembered and how she saw two bad omens before the Titanic departed from berth 44. On the day the Titanic set out on her first and only voyage, I was just a girl in my teens, looking forward with a schoolgirl's anticipation to a voyage in the world's latest and finest liner on a tour through North America. The weather was brilliant, and the docks at Southampton were crowded with bustling people, for this was no ordinary boat departure. It was the departure of a wonder ship, a floating palace that far excelled all others in size and magnificence, and men said that she could not sink. Our passengers were crushed and pushed about by excited crowds as we struggled to reach the gangway, but once across, we were swallowed up in that great vessel. The noise made in getting the luggage aboard was deafening, but when the Titanic started on its journey, an even greater pandemonium broke loose. The cheering of thousands of people, and the shrieking of many sirens. Then, as if some unseen hand had silenced them, a sudden hush fell upon the people. I went to the side to see what was the matter, and found that the passing of the mighty Titanic had drawn another liner, the New York, from her moorings into the fairway. Tugs soon took the New York back to her place, and the majority of us went on our way without giving further thought to this incident, but some passengers took it as a bad omen of ill fortune and were further discomfited by the fact that large numbers of seagulls followed the ship to the sea. This, they said, was a sign of impending disaster. Roberta didn't think much about the omens. Instead, she used her time to explore the ship, attend to her mistress's needs, and make friends, which is a possible reference to spending time with her mysterious lover. However, the lovers might have had more time together than it's thought. On the Titanic, 322 stewards provide service to the passengers and attend to their needs. Each passenger in first, second and third class had their bathroom and bedroom stewards. Each duty steward includes dressing and serving passengers who want to have their meals in their dining room. Some separate stewards were responsible for maintaining clean bedsheets, bathroom towels and table linens. The stewards would be responsible for assisting up to 25 rooms depending on the clientele. During the voyage, and like she does on land, Roberta would be responsible for dressing the Countess, as well as maintaining her jewellery and taking them to the purser's office for safety and attending her. However, since the Countess would spend more time with her cousin, Roberta would have free time during 80% of the voyage. It isn't known about the steward's timetable, but considering he might have had spare time, or if he played hooky, they must have somehow had time to get acquainted. However, Roberta had been caught in a love triangle with an older gentleman. Roberta also didn't reveal who this man was either, but she explained that he gave her unwanted attention, and she felt uncomfortable with him. On the fateful Sunday evening, I went into the music saloon to listen to the band and found myself in the company of a man who had previously taken a fatherly interest in me. He was travelling alone and seemed to suffer from his loneliness, for he had been one of the passengers most affected by forebodings. When 10 o'clock came and I was called away to bed, he begged me to remain with him a little longer, saying he was sure something awful was about to happen. When 10 o'clock came and I was called away to bed, he begged me to remain with him a little longer, saying he was sure something awful was about to happen. Perhaps he was influenced by the fact that the band was playing such pieces as Ave Maria and Nearer My God to Thee. His seriousness and pessimism frightened me. So for once in my life, I was quite glad to be sent to bed. I bade him good night and never saw him again. At the time of the scenario, the Countess and Gladys were dining near the first-class reception room, enjoying the musical entertainment from the orchestra. Around 9:15 to 10:30 p.m. maximum, the three women retired to bed. At 11:40 p.m, the Titanic hit an iceberg on her starboard side. Roberta woke up and felt the collision. After I had been in bed for about an hour and a half, I was awakened by a terrific crash, followed by the rending of metal, the rushing of water, and the shouting of men. I was about to get up when a steward came and said, "Miss, we have struck an iceberg, but I don't think there's any danger. Should there be, I'll come back and let you know." This was a steward Roberta had interacted with during the voyage. Roberta became concerned about the situation, but the steward, like many crew members and stewards on board, said there was nothing to worry about, despite having had an accident. Roberta went back to her cabin and she fell asleep. A few minutes later, he knocked on her cabin door again. When he came in, he told Roberta not to panic. Then, he said she should dress quickly, put on her lifebelt and go up on deck. I put on the first clothes that came into my hand and found my lifebelt. I could not fix this, but the steward came and did it for me. Still realising nothing of the danger I was in, I joked with him about the funny way in which it was fixed. He did not answer, but smiled very sadly and shook his head. Then I knew something serious had happened. Roberta then found water in her cabin. The realisation hit her on the head and Roberta knew she had to find the Countess and Gladys. The steward and Roberta managed to find them on deck. Roberta described what happened when she went up there. "I was carried by a swarm of other passengers to the boat deck and shall never forget the strange sight that met my eyes. There were pieces of ice all over the deck, and groups of men and women looking gaunt and fearful in their night attire or in odd garments hastily donned. Some of them were talking calmly, firmly believing that her watertight compartment would save the Titanic from sinking. Others were frantic with excitement or dumb with terror, huddled closely together in silence as though they knew they were about to be parted by death. There were men swearing horribly and women quietly sobbing, and I knew that many of them were praying as they never prayed before. But there was no panic, and I, with the fortitude of youth, looked on in wonder. It was bitterly cold. Roberta told the Countess what happened before the group met a purser. He then said these words to the Countess: "Hurry, little lady, there is not much time. I am glad you did not come to see me for your jewels as some ladies have." While waiting, Roberta, the women and the steward saw the crew loading and lowering away the lifeboats. I watched them preparing to lower the lifeboat. I heard the order, women and children first. I saw women parting from their husbands and fathers. Some women clung to their husbands and refused to leave them, but the ship's officers pulled them apart, the women to live and the men to die. Towards 1 a.m, the Countess, Gladys and Roberta boarded lifeboat number 8. The steward assisted her into the boat, and as he did so, the steward handed Roberta the badge from his uniform to remember him. Roberta would never see her lover again. When she saw him disappear, Roberta also noticed Captain Smith and Chief Officer Henry Wilde. She noticed that the captain was in shock and upset. An elderly officer, with tears streaming down his cheeks, helped us into one of the lifeboats. He was Captain Smith, the master of that ill-fated vessel. As the lifeboat began to descend, I heard him say, "Goodbye, remember you are British." Roberta described what happened when lifeboat number 8 touched the water and the aftermath of the sinking. We dropped over 50 feet down the side of that huge vessel, and it seemed an eternity before the lifeboat reached the water. There were about 35 of us in the boat, including 3 of the crew, a seaman, a steward and a cook. These men had been told to get away from the Titanic as quickly as they could, lest the lifeboat is drawn under by the suction of the sinking vessel. When we were at a safe distance, they stopped rowing and we watched the Titanic sink rapidly into the black depths. She was ablaze with electric light until the last minute. Then I heard the terrible last cries of the 1,200 men, women and children left aboard her, rising above the din of the explosion of the boilers. For a moment, the sky was lighted up, with black masses thrown up into the air, and we saw that dreadful iceberg towering above us, like some grim monster about to devour its prey. Then came the awful silence, more terrible than the sounds that had gone before. The sea was calm, otherwise no one would have been saved. But by now it was studded with the wreckage and with bodies of the dead and dying. Some poor souls reached the lifeboats, only to be pushed back into the relentless ice-cold sea, for the boats were full and in grave danger of swamping. Inside the lifeboat, Roberta, the ladies and the rest of the survivors were suffering from the intense cold weather. On board there was a loaf of bread. All through the night, people took turns rowing the lifeboat. I took my place and remember that my long hair was very much in the way, for it often caught between my hands and the oar and caused me terrible pain. They steered our boat towards the lights of a tramp steamer in the distance, but we had no means of attracting attention, and the steamer's lights slowly passed out of sight. The disappearance of the tramp steamer seemed to leave us on the ocean, a handful of people in an open boat, and we were faced with a worse fate than drowning. To add to our misery, the sea became rough and our boat was pitching and tossing helplessly. At last, the morning came, and we saw several icebergs around us, grim spectres that would crush our frail craft like an eggshell. The lifeboat was on the ocean for several hours. When the surviving passengers and crew spotted the rescue ship Carpathia, it was reported that passengers sang the hymn, "Pull It for the Shore." We soon reached the Carpathia and were taken up her great side one more time in a kind of cradle, just a piece of board, strong hands and willing hands at the top. This was no easy operation, for the lifeboat was being dashed along the Carpathia's side, and while waiting to be taken up, we were jerked backwards and forwards by the fury of the waves. As soon as I reached the deck, kindly hands put a rug around my shoulders and pressed brandy to my trembling lips. Roberta married Cunliffe Bolling, a business consultant, in 1919 and died in 1963, aged 71. While it is unclear as to the identity of the steward, there have been some theories and questions as to why this or that man is, and what's the connection. Certainly, there are more about depending on the evidence. The first theory of Roberta's lover was wireless operator Jack Phillips. Roberta mentioned Jack in her story, and it was mentioned in Elizabeth Kay's Lifeboat 8. Elizabeth claims that the connection between the pair was that they had lived in the same village in Surrey. However, we can say that this is a debunked theory, because there was no evidence that Jack Phillips had left the wireless between the iceberg collision and the final minutes of the sinking. Only Harold Bride left the room, but he left it once. Another theory claims that Roberta's other lover was first-class cabin steward Charles Crumplin. However, Charles was a married 35-year-old man with a family, and it is doubtful they would have a relationship. Roberta did write a letter to Charles's wife, Ada, when she recalled his actions and final hours during the sinking. The Countess of Roths sends her deepest sympathy to Mrs. Crumplin in her sadness. Lady Roth saw her husband towards the last, as he came and helped her and Miss Cherry, her cousin, and put on the lifeboats, and he was always so attentive and obliging. Lady Roths did not see him after he got up on deck, and is sure that he was helping other passengers and doing his duty with all the other magnificent men who went down on that terrible night. Whatever the case, we may never know Roberta's lover. In April 2022, the brooch with a picture of Roberta sold at auction for £68,000, or $81,000. While the Titanic holds many secrets, it is clear that Roberta's story is one of many love stories that have inspired James Cameron's iconic characters. As Gloria Stewart quoted in the movie, "A woman's heart is a deep ocean of secrets."
I would like to thank Erin of Airy Berry True Crime for being our guest host and joining us on the voyage. On her channel, Erin's content focuses on crime and solving mysteries. If you are into crime and mystery, head onto Erin's channel and subscribe for future videos. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please subscribe for more historical content. Until next time, this has been History Inside a Nutshell, Departing from the Docks. Thank you so much for all of your support and enjoy the rest of your voyage.